Hey everyone, excited to have you back on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, whatever you're listening to. Excited to have you on episode 121 with Sarry Ibrahim. He's the founder of the Financial Asset Protection and he works with high net worth individuals. And yeah, I think you're all in for a treat. I think we'll learn a lot today. I know a lot of listeners are in that wealth creation stage, right? Like just getting, whether it's purchasing their first home or starting a side business. I think this will be really enlightening for a lot of folks. Welcome. Sorry.
Hey, Davidson, thank you so much for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm curious, like what brought you into this field? Like, I know it's not easy, right? I know people like finances tend to be a tough topic that just requires a lot of trust for people
hmm
to be vulnerable and honest.
hmm
But I'm curious, why you enjoy doing what you do.
Yeah, and that's a good question. Yeah, it's something like, especially being a self-employed financial planner. It's definitely something that's not really that usual. Um,
Mhm.
but I got into it mostly because I've always been attracted to solving problems. I like challenges, and I've always been attracted to money, like the idea of money, not just money itself, but the idea of money and how it works and how people think and feel about money. Like you said, it takes a lot of trust dealing with people. This is mostly like a people business, not so much of like a data business or a numbers business. It's mostly about connecting with people and helping
Yeah.
them achieve their goals. So that really drew me into the field, and I enjoy what I'm doing right now. I enjoy talking to people, meeting new people. Like I'm in Chicago, right? And I help and service clients in all 50 states. So that's pretty cool to do that too. And obviously overdone almost 99% of the time it's done over Zoom or over the phone. So I get to talk to a lot of people, hear, what's working for them, what's not working for them. Like I talk to some people who are struggling, just being able to support themselves, and I help them figure out solutions for that. Then I talk to people who own 100 real estate properties and they're looking for different ways to deploy capital. So
Mhm.
there's a huge spectrum of people that I deal with, and I love it so far.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's interesting because it doesn't necessarily mm, like how you grew up, like in terms of like
hmm
your background, but
Yeah.
it is mostly just having like a growth mindset and
hmm
knowing that like, being intentional or thoughtful and then I'm sure different strokes for different folks, right? Some
Yeah.
people like the crypto, some people are more like S&P 500. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure you cater depending on what their risk tolerance is, right?
Yeah. So typically with financial advisors, like from a conventional standpoint and a traditional standpoint, usually financial advisors work in that way. So they have clients and they either do stocks, bonds, or mutual funds, and they ask about risk tolerance, their age, all these things. The approach we're taking is completely different from that. So we don't do any investing, we don't do any crypto investing internally. We don't do any of those types of investments. What we do is we focus more on saving solutions, and we show clients how to become their own source of financing. So, for example, a lot of our clients are small business owners and real estate investors. So we eventually show them how they could become their own source of financing. Because David said, if you look at it this way, typically with a lot of small business owners and even also all business owners, not just small business owners, but if we're talking to small business owners, some of the problems they have generally are, it's two common problems. One, taxes owed on an individual level and on a
Mhm.
business level. And typically as you make more money, which is the goal of being self-employed, is to eventually make more money, not just the freedom, the time, all that stuff, but eventually a lot of people get into self-employment to become wealthy. And with that, it opens up a tax problem, short term and long term. Short term, like this year when you file your taxes, you have to pay a lot if you made a lot of money. And then also in retirement too, when you claim a lot of income, your social security is taxed higher, your social security income is higher, your
Yeah.
Medicare premiums are higher. Everything you do you become in a higher tax bracket when you make more money. So that's obviously a problem. And then the second major problem is the amount of interest you pay out to lenders. So let's say, for example, somebody owns a business, they have a line of credit. Let's say it's $100,000 line of credit at 5% interest. Now, let's say this business owner is using this money and he or she is doing really well. Like they're using that money, making more money with that, generating revenue, paying back the line of credit. And the bank sees this and they're like, hey, good job. You're doing a great job. It looks like your business, based on your repayment structure, it looks like you're doing really well. We're going to increase your limit from 100,000 to 250,000. Now this business owner sees this as like, all right, this is an opportunity. This is like a report card. Like we just got an A on a report card now. Like this is a good sign of business, and it is that you're getting access to more capital. But what's truly happening now is you're increasing the bank's revenue now, because it's the same interest rate, 5% at 100,000, 5% at 250,000. But the fact that there's more volume now, there's more of a pool of capital that you have access to, it results in more revenue for the bank. So now I think like every real estate investor, every business owner is almost like a representative for the bank. They're making the bank more passive income by accessing their
Yeah.
money. The bank doesn't do anything. Banks usually could be, an office of 10 employees, and they're loaning out billions of dollars around the whole country, and everybody's doing all the work and they're making all the interest. So that's a problem, obviously, for business owners, is we need to recoup that interest that we're paying to other lenders. That's where we come in. We help mitigate tax exposure now and in the future, and reduce the amount of interest that they pay to other lenders, and then for them to divert that interest back into their pocket.
Mm. And I'm sure every state is a little bit different too, right? So,
Mhm.
and then every year it's different too, right? So you kind of have to, depending on like politics and
Yeah.
regulations and stuff like that.
That's a good point. So when you get, like, I'm not a tax professional, right? But like when you talk
Yeah.
to CPAs and tax attorneys, obviously, like every year, every state is going to be completely different,
Yeah.
But there are still some general things to consider. Like I think, like as mentioned earlier, the wealthier you become, the more exposed you become to taxes, unless you have a solid tax planning solution in place.
Yeah.
That everything I'm saying right now is kind of like evergreen. It doesn't matter who's in office, and
Mm.
that's the point. You don't want to constantly keep flipping. Like, all right, this person's in office, I need to do this, and this person's president, I need to do this. you
Mm.
want to you want to have tax solutions in place regardless of how the economy is doing, regardless of who's the governor, who is the president. You want to have these solutions in place regardless of what's going on external to you.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's awesome. So, it sounds like, do you work with like estate planning
Mhm.
attorneys as well to like partner with them?
Yeah, good question. So we have like we have referral partners. So for example, we have CPAs, we have tax attorneys, we have estate planning attorneys, we have asset protection attorneys, we have business coaches, life coaches. So the first step when we meet with clients is we do something called like a financial analysis, but it's more of a confidential questionnaire, really. That's what it is.
Mm.
And it's us getting to know the client. We get to know their financial situation, and also they're kind of like where they're at right now in life. What do they value? If they're a business owner, we ask questions about their business, like how is your business doing? How do you make your business better? And all these things. And then from there, we might connect with, we say, hey, you know what? I think you need an estate planning attorney. Or hey,
Um,
I think you might need an asset protection attorney. I think you might need a CPA. And this helps keep everybody. It helps us offer more help to the clients without doing that extra work, because I'm not
mhm.
an estate planning attorney. I can't give any estate planning advice, but
Right.
I do know somebody who, and then we could kind of blend our solutions together. This is something
Mm.
that like the wealthy do, right? The wealthy have their boardroom meetings. They have their accountant, their lawyer, their financial advisor, all sitting at the table, and they're all coordinating the plan accordingly, and not
Yeah.
and it's a congruent plan. Usually it's all concurring, it's all together, rather than like your accountant saying one thing and then your lawyer saying another thing and then your financial
Mhm.
advisor saying another thing, and confusing the client.
Interesting. So it sounds like you have a team and you work pretty well with each other.
Mhm.
Um, that's interesting. Have you noticed like any trends in terms of, because I do think a lot of this is mindset, right? What about people who don't like trust a lot of people and they're like scared of like, um I guess like they're afraid of like judgment. Like maybe they think their situation's a lot worse than it really is, and they're afraid of like being honest, like, oh, like I have a lot of student loans
Mhm.
debt or something like that. Like, how does one kind of get over the fear of like looking bad?
Mhm. Yeah, and you're right. It is mindset. It starts with how how badly do you want something? Do you really want to solve your problem, or do you want it just to be there in the background?
Mm,
And this is general. This is not relevant to financial planning. This is just, in general life. Like if you have a problem, the best thing to do to solve that problem is to first identify it. Pick it up, look at it from different angles. So that means, for example, if a client has a lot of debt, the first step to resolving that debt issue is to identify it, look at it, break it up. If you have 5 credit cards, well, let's write out each one. Let's write out each credit card name, the last four of it, how much each balance is on it, how much is the minimum payment, how much is the interest. We want to analyze the debt, not necessarily from a financial perspective, but from a clarity perspective. We want to know what's going on. And just like anything else in life, when you face it, you've just accomplished 50% of it now. You've
yeah.
looked at it, you're not afraid of it anymore. And that's what you
Mm,
have to do that. And as far as the clients, like being too, like for example, embarrassed working with us, you know it's it's up to the client. We can't force them to work with us. They have to make that initiative to reach out and work with us. It's the same thing like anything else. For example, like when you if you had a legal problem, would you be too embarrassed to talk to a lawyer? No, you would
mm,
reach out to the lawyer and ask for legal advice. If you
yeah.
had a tax problem, would you be too embarrassed to talk to your accountant? No, absolutely not. You would reach out to your accountant and say, I have this tax problem. And if you, for example, were unmotivated in business, would you be too shy to talk to a life coach or business coach? No, that's their job. Their job is to help you get
Mm,
motivated, to help you find these things. So the same thing with financial planning. You want to be expressive, and when you have somebody that you trust, know, and like, um, and you're expressive, then you will reach your goals. You will reach your financial
mm,
goals if you have somebody with you, and somebody you trust, and somebody that you're transparent with, and somebody that's vice versa transparent with you.
mm. Yeah, I like what you said about breaking it down too, because I think
Mhm,
a lot of times we're afraid because we think we're afraid to like look at the actual numbers
mhm,
and just break when you break it down, like you said, into simple like what's so and what's
mhm.
going on, it makes it so much easier because I think sometimes we build out the problem to be much bigger than it really
Mhm.
is in our heads.
Yeah.
But once you lay it down and you see it, then it doesn't seem as bad as not dealing with it at all and letting it kind of slide, you know?
Yeah, you're right. It's actually it's way worse to it's much worse to ignore a problem because you're worried about the way it's going to affect you in the moment. A lot of
Yeah.
people do that. A lot of people will say, I don't want to look at this credit card statement because it's gonna put me in a bad mood, you know,
Yeah.
or whatever the case. It's the same thing with, like, for example, dealing with creditors, right? Like if you, for example, owe, banks and agencies money, the worst thing to do is ignore them, because
Mm,
that's when I think things get really stressful, because they're going to call you, email you, knock on your
mm,
door, send you letters, and you're just going to have the stress of the debt to begin with, plus now this harassment, and then now it's just going to compound, and so you're going to have all these problems. Rather, if you call them and you tell them, like, hey, I'm having these debt issues, or I'm having these problems, I lost my job, or I just got all these medical bills, they're actually, they have to legally talk to you, they have to help you, they have to figure out a plan with you, and they'll actually appreciate it even more. So I
mm.
guess, again, this is not really financial advice. If you talk to, collection agencies or whatever, this is more of, life advice. It's like, talk, identify your problems and express them, and don't just, conceal
Mm.
them.
Yeah, I like what you said about values too, right?
Mhm,
Because one person could really value like just having a really nice house, and some person
mhm.
might value experiences, like maybe they like to travel, right? But you're intentional where you're like, okay, well, if someone is really into real estate, obviously that's gonna be the bulk of the investments.
Yeah,
But if
yeah.
someone values like, they rather just put it in a REIT and not actually
Mhm.
own like actual real estate, so it sounds like you're very adaptive and you really respect what that person values and you cater to that person's what they want, right?
Yeah, you have to be. Yeah, you have to be adaptive and dynamic, and kind of adjust accordingly, because it's like saying, for example, when you go to a doctor, the doctor doesn't just prescribe you something based off what he or she has in mind. They're gonna ask you what's wrong, what hurts, and then after they identify that, then they're gonna, figure out your height, weight, other pre-existing conditions you have, and then from
Yeah.
there prescribe a relevant, adequate prescription to you, something that's relevant to you and and your medical situation. And the same is true with us. Like, we can't just have something in our back pocket where it's like, once this client comes in the door, I'm gonna pitch this. You
Mm.
don't know what their situation is. You have to ask the questions, diagnose the problem, figure it out, and then make a relevant recommendation based off of what they said and what they need and what they want, actually.
Yeah, and do you have like what have you noticed are the common trends amongst like your really good clients, like the ones that or and the ones that kind of get stuck and it seems like the same month after month you're kind of dealing with the same issues. Like have you noticed any common
Ye-
trends?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Wealthy people, or actually my wealthier clients, they're always learning. They're always asking questions. They don't care what, like, for example, they'll ask questions regardless of how the other person is going to perceive them to be.
Mm.
So they ask questions regardless of the way they look or sound, but it's mostly about the information they're getting. That's something that uh the wealthier clients do. They are constantly learning and asking questions.
Huh.
Whereas other clients I work with might, assume that, like, for example, the financial analysis meeting we do is it's a free meeting. Some people might assume that they have to um like pay for that. Just a random assumption. They don't know that. They don't know that. So that
Mm.
it's always good to ask questions. Always good to ask questions. Always wait until you figure out the information before you act upon it. Always.
Uh,
It's like negotiation. It's like while somebody's talking, you don't know what they're gonna say. So ask the open-ended question and let them finish, because they might say like, oh, hey, I'll do, this deal, and you say, all right, deal, I'll take it. And it's like they were going to say something that was going to favor you, but then you just
hmm.
cut them off short, and then now they're going to sell short because you let them sell short. So it's the same thing with everything else. Is you want people to finish, speak, fluently, and then wait, because you get more out of life that way when you listen more carefully, and
Mm.
and and you let people finish.
And this might be an interesting question, but what if you get those clients who they watch the news so much and they're like, oh, sell, sell,
Yeah,
like they're not long-term thinking. They're kind of
yeah.
just like, oh my God, panic mode, like I want to sell everything. Like what are your thoughts on how to control, not control, but manage clients who are just always like freaking out about everything?
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, so we don't really help with like stock investments or like crypto or anything like volatile like that, like where, for example, where it's going to change overnight, or it's going to change.
Yeah.
um but if I was dealing with somebody like that, um I would want to make sure that they already trust us to begin with, and they're already trusting our decisions that we're making together, because a lot of times clients, they're the ones making the decisions. It's not just us saying, hey,
Mm.
do this solution, do ABC solution. They're also saying, I want, like, for example, we would ask you, like, what is it that you want to accomplish, Mr. Client? I want to accomplish ABC solution, and then say, all right, we're going to do ABC solution. So if they're constantly trying to pivot out of ABC solution, it's like,
Yeah.
you're the one that wanted this to begin with, so
Mhm.
it takes trust, it takes rapport, it takes building trust with them, commitment on both sides. But it's possible, it's um, that typically doesn't really happen, where, at least that we work with, clients are like constantly trying to bounce around between different solutions.
Yeah. Okay. So people don't pivot as often then it sounds like.
Yeah, with they probably do with investments, more so like in the stock market, bonds, mutual funds, where it's more volatile. They have to consistently be pivoting, but not with our recommendations.
Okay. And then do you also deal with like do whole life as well?
That's one of our core focuses. Yeah, whole life insurance is
Yeah.
one of our core focuses. We do it mostly from a self-banking perspective, where it's like, for example, somebody wants to, how I addressed two problems: interest that we pay to lenders, and then taxes that we pay to the government. Well, one way to address both of those problems could be, depending on the client situation, it could be cash value whole life insurance, because whole life insurance has cash value that builds up. It earns compound interest. You have the
Yeah.
ability to borrow against it, so that way you can use it as a vehicle to offset taxes for the future, and to recoup interest you would otherwise pay to lenders. So you would become your own source of financing. And in other words, you're diverting all the money you're making right now through your business, through self-employment, through regular employment, through real estate investing. You can put it through the whole life policy, borrow against it, and then use it in many different ways, ultimately leaving you, the client, with more interest in your pocket, and more and less on taxes, because it's typically a tax deferred vehicle. um,
Mhm.
and and in most situations, the loans and withdrawals are also tax free.
Interesting. And is there a limit on this? Because I'm sure you have folks that, you know, they're able to, because, or is it just an education thing where just some people just aren't even aware of this being an option? So is it just educating them, letting them know, like, hey, like, did you know that, there's this ability to help you not have to pay so much freaking taxes?
Yeah, and that's why actually we started the show. We started our show thinking like a bank. Um, we called it thinking like a bank because banks are the largest purchasers of whole life insurance, for
Mm,
banking purposes, obviously for the cash value part. So that got us thinking like if banks are using it, why are they using it and how can everyday people apply those strategies? So that's why we named the show Thinking Like a Bank. So
yeah.
that's one way I help inform people. So for example, if I meet somebody, they're like, oh, hey, what do you do? They're like, oh, I do, financial planning stuff, rather than going into this whole presentation, I could just say, hey, check out my podcast, Thinking Like a Bank. And
Yeah.
then they can find that we have episodes where we talk about exactly how like whole life insurance works, how it's broken down, the intricate
Mm,
parts of it, why it's relevant to somebody, and how it helps clients. And then also, this is why I do guest appearances, like on your show right now, on other shows, and I still will. I do about I think 20 guest appearances per month.
oh,
So it's a big chunk of our marketing efforts is going out there and meeting awesome hosts like yourself and hopefully meeting with the audience too. Like I've actually traveled around the country and met up with podcast hosts and clients that have
yeah.
generated from the appearances. So it's a
uh,
solid way of meeting people.
yeah. Yeah, and it's like you build such a deeper relationship too, right?
Mm-hmm,
Because like you
mm-hmm,
really, that's really cool. Um, so it sounds like you're a brokerage then, right? Like
mm-hmm.
you can use multiple channels. Like it doesn't have to be like a certain, like for instance, like Northwestern
Yeah.
Mutual or New York Life, right? It's like you could only do that, right? But it sounds like you have a lot that you can pull from.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, it's a solid point. Yeah, it's definitely those would be captive agencies. Like for example, like you said, Northwestern, Prudential, New York Life, sometimes Mass Mutual. These are all like you only work for them. You have their business cards. You wear their polos, their shirts. You go to
Yeah.
their buildings. You that's all you could do. You're not allowed to do
Right.
anything else. So, for example, if you are in that situation and the client, is interested in a financial plan, they want to do, for example, something where it's flexible. They could, one year put in 1,000, the other year put in 10,000. And
Mm,
then one of those companies doesn't have that product for the client, then you can't help that client because the client truly wanted the flexibility. So now, as a
right.
captive agent, you would have to figure out a way to convince that client otherwise. That's
Right.
an issue with being a captive agent. That's a thinking process. I was a captive agent at Allstate. That's how it was. You had to figure out ways to position your brand or your brand in your company over.
Right.
Whereas right now we're independent, and I'm happy to say I'll never be a captive agent ever again. I enjoy the fact that if I'm talking to a client, they're like, oh hey, I want to do one policy where I put in $1,000 a year, and if I want to, I can add up to 10,000. And then I want to do a second policy that's owned by my business, and then I want to do a third policy that I only pay into for 7 years, and that's it. It's done. I could literally go through 3 companies or 4 companies, find the ones I want. I can go through more than that. I could do annuities, do all these creative solutions. And if you notice, Davidson, what happened is that it starts with the client's want, not what I want. You know what I'm saying?
Mm,
It never starts with the method first, like, oh, I'm going to do this type of financial solution. It starts with the
yeah.
client saying, I want XYZ, I want, this. And it's not necessarily the client saying, I want this product. It's the client saying, I want this function or I want this duty. I want to be able to do XYZ without naming a specific product. They're not going to a menu,
Hmm.
at a fast food place and saying, I want number one, I want number two. They're saying
Right.
they're describing what they want, and the advisor has to listen carefully and then identify what they truly want and then make that recommendation based off of what they want. Independent
Yeah.
agents typically could do that, whereas captive agents they can't, because if you keep it open-ended in a captive setting and the client says, a captive agent asks the client, what do you want? The client says, I want this flexibility, I want this, I want whatever. And now that captive agent might have just shot themselves in the foot because they can't do those things. Sometimes they can't do those things.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I think, like you said, everyone has such different needs, different
Mm-hmm.
values, different
Mm-hmm.
requirements. Then, it's hard to be, I mean, you essentially have to be biased, right? Because you can't pull from so many different companies. You have to, you're limited to a menu of options,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Exactly. Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah, true.
Interesting. What's like the most common um bad advice that people, or what are some preconceived notions that they have about like life insurance that you know that is simply just not true?
Yeah, that it's that. So a lot of people have notions that like life insurance cannot be an investment, and it's not really an investment. It's more of a savings vehicle. It could be a savings vehicle. So they already have that notion, and they also have the preconceived notion that it is and it's an either or option, meaning that either I do like whole life insurance or I put money in the stock market, or in real estate. And a lot of people actually have more of that mindset. As we get older, we start to limit more of our options. So we start to have this idea where it's like, all right, I have this dollar, what's
Mhm.
one thing that I could do with it, and only that one thing, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas, and that's the limited mindset, and
Mm.
I think that people don't know that you could apply, whole life insurance using it the bank on yourself way, or the infinite bank, also known as the infinite banking concept. You could use it that way. You could borrow against it, buy stocks, buy cryptocurrency. Like I did a podcast this morning with a guy on my show who he does the same thing as me. He's an infinite banking professional. He helps people with whole life insurance. And what he did was he funded a whole life policy and then borrowed $19,000 from it when Bitcoin last year was 19,000. He bought
Mm.
up Bitcoin with it. And then he paid back the policy loan, the whole life policy loan, and then now he has both. He
Mm.
has a cash value in the whole life policy growing, and he owned the Bitcoin. So he was just thinking
Ah.
like a bank. He did multiple
Huh.
things with that money over and over again. So a lot of people don't know that you could even do that with whole life. They think that
Yeah.
once you apply a dollar to it, that's it. You cannot do anything else with that dollar that you've applied.
Huh. It kind of sounds like my friend who he does something with his home equity where
Yeah.
he uses it and then reinvests it in other stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's all about leverage. It's all about continuously moving different things, liquidity. You never want to stay in one spot. You always want to keep rolling. And
Hmm.
again, it's not like for example, like never have your eggs in one basket thing. Well, it's like you don't you could have different eggs in different baskets without necessarily having to spend more.
Hmm. Interesting. And is there a situation where like maybe someone's like much earlier that
Mhm.
only term insurance would make sense, or is it like would you recommend whole life like most of the time?
No, no, I would recommend I'd recommend term life insurance. For example, I have a client right now who has a commercial outstanding loan right now, and his banker told him that if he got $1 million life insurance policy, that they would renegotiate the terms and then lower that interest by 0.5%. That would save him. I forgot what the math was. It would save him like a couple $1,000s a year just by that 0.5%. So that's exactly what we did. We did a term life policy for him for the sole purpose of reducing the cost of the capital borrowed for that
Huh.
commercial property. So that's how you have to think too. Again, it's all about the objective, identifying where the client's at, what they want, that unique advantage or that unique situation.
Yeah.
If I had just it's impossible to just say I'm going to sell this person term life, or I'm going to sell this person whole life based off of just
Right.
having the card in my back pocket, and then once they come, I'll just take out that card. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. If this client wasn't transparent with me and told me about his loan situation, we wouldn't be able to done that. Now, because the objective now is to get life insurance to lower the cost of that capital, to lower that cost of that interest. Whole life insurance wouldn't make sense in this specific situation. Would not make sense.
Right.
Term would be more relevant to him.
Huh. This is a totally like irrelevant, different
Yeah,
question, but
yeah,
it sounds like you're Arabic, right?
yeah, yeah. I am. Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
what can like Americans take from Arabic culture that that you feel like in America we could definitely learn from?
Oh, I mean, it's um, I mean, it's a different culture. So I was born and raised in the United States, right?
Uh-huh.
And my parents are born in the Middle East. I speak Arabic. It's a completely different culture. It's very different. I mean, there's a lot of similarities too. We're still humans, right? There's
Right.
a lot of human similarities, but at the same time, there are a lot of differences too. I think honestly, it's too much. It's too wide to kind of say over here. Um, yeah, I think growing up with people around me who are of the same culture, I guess more family oriented, but then also Americans too are family oriented too. So it's kind of hard to just put a brush on it and say that all people are different, all people are the same. So it's kind of, yeah, hard to answer.
No, I respect that because you're saying that like we shouldn't be judging or we shouldn't
Yeah,
assume that like okay Americans are a certain way because then that kind of puts like a box or label it's kind of like putting someone but like you said not everyone is like that right so
exactly. Like this, like I was on YouTube or TikTok, I forgot where, the other day, and this lady posted something saying, uh, um, she's like, she was making a joke like, oh, if you go to a Russian person's house, like you're Russian, you go to a Russian person's house, they're like, oh yeah, just put the cake or whatever on the table, or
uh-huh
and then you're like, oh, I didn't bring anything, and then it's like, that's like disrespectful. Like you don't go to somebody's house and not bring anything. And then people
right
in the
right
comments were saying like, oh, in Italy it's the same thing. Oh, in Germany it's the same thing. Oh, in Sweden it's the
same
same
with
thing.
Asian culture too yeah
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then all of them were saying like, yeah, in Thailand it's the same thing. In Japan it's the same thing.
yeah
And and then um and then somebody was like, oh yeah, it's probably all the same except for the US. And then a whole bunch of people started saying like, no, I was born and raised in the US and that's the same that we do. So I think with everything like that, you could find somebody that does the same exact thing as you. It just
yeah
seems foreign, I guess.
huh now I respect that I mean it's like sometimes I have to be careful when I'm like oh Americans are a certain way or like
Yeah, yeah,
Westerners
yeah.
Easterners are a certain way right it's like sometimes we're like programmed to kind of like put but it's not healthy to do that you know
Exact, because you don't know. Yeah, exactly. You'll literally be shocked if you assume things like that. You'll be shocked, for sure. Like for
yeah
example, I just said, more, Americans could be more family oriented. Well, who said they're not? You know what I'm saying? Like somebody
Hmm.
might be saying, I'm American. I was born and raised. My whole family was, and we're all really close. So again, it's an assumption to think that way.
Yeah, well, that is an interesting topic, right? Because I do think, coming from like an Asian
Yeah.
background, we do like a lot of Asians, for instance, like their grandparents or their parents will live with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like that's not the smartest thing to do, right? Because sometimes it almost like holds them back from potentially doing things that they would want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I see that as like not the healthiest in terms of like just family.
Hmm.
I've seen so many Asian families where like they just stay home all day and they just take care of the grandparents and
Yeah.
they're not as happy because they're like miserable because they're like oh like I can't go anywhere like it's
Yeah.
kind of like having a kid again like having a newborn sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, definitely. You don't want to just assume that like people do things like, for example, yeah, that's a good point. A lot of, I've heard that a lot and from a lot of different cultures where like older people stay at home, whereas American culture, there's different things, but at the same time, you never know what the situation is.
Right. Yeah. No, I respect that. I do have a question
Yeah.
on like I feel like there's so many providers out there. Like you said, there's like your Prudentials, Mass
Yeah.
Mutuals, Northwestern Mutuals, like New York Life, like Allstate, right? Like
Mhm.
everyone is always saying like I'm the best. Like like and I get it, it's about the relationship, but like
Mhm.
even Primerica, like how do we truly know who actually, you know what I mean? Or is it like marginal the differences where like it really depends more on the individual versus like the actual company.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It's not a okay. So like when it comes to building financial security for the future, for your life, for your family's life, for your business, it is not a matter of commodity. It's a matter of concept, meaning that it's not a matter of which company is the best, lowest prices, cheapest, price driven matter. It's a
Mhm.
matter of who out there, which person could help me achieve my goals, and what could that person do to help me. That's what it's about.
Mhm.
And I'm reading a book right now by Ray Dalio, Principles. Have you read it?
Yeah, I love that book, man.
Yeah,
He's
the book
great.
is awesome. And he's saying
Yeah.
when you're hiring, he's like, every business I've ever done was only successful because of the employees that I hired. And it was not a matter of what they knew, but rather who they were as a person.
Mm.
So instead of choosing what, choose who.
Hmm.
Same thing. Instead of choosing which product or which company is going to best fit me, choose who could best fit you. Which
Huh.
person, which advisor person that you could deal with, who could help you.
I love that advice, man. It's so true, right? Because you can have such different ends of the spectrum. You can have a rep at the same exact company,
Yeah.
but have completely different philosophies or just, risk
Mhm.
whatever it is. And then, it's interesting. I know a lot of people that will purchase like multiple whole life policies from different,
Yeah.
like, so it's like that's also something I see as well, right? So it's
Yeah, and that's where the independent advisor, sorry to cut you off, but that's where the independent advisor comes in, is that we would do like new, it's never just like a one-time situation where it's like, all right, which one policy am I gonna get, and which one policy is gonna be the best policy that I could possibly find. It's not like that at all. It's very common for us to do a new policy every year, or every other year we're doing a new policy through different companies, different amounts, different flexibility, different things. So again, and the reason why we're doing that is to reach the financial goals. We're not just doing that just to shop for the best product or the best thing. It's not something that you just buy one time and you're set for life. It's something that you're not even buying it really. You're using it for your financial life.
Hmm. No, I love that. And this is kind of an unrelated question, but it sounds like you've been doing a lot of podcast episodes. Like, what have you learned from being a podcaster? Like, I'm sure it's really opened up your eyes in terms of like it sounds like leverage
Mhm.
and just like different perspectives.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's a different perspective. It's definitely I think improved my like public speaking skills. Research, I have to always do research, like whether I'm the host or the guest, I always have to do research.
Yeah.
Asking if I'm the host, asking questions, keeping the person talking, but as a guest, obviously, as you could tell, like, constantly explaining things, open-ended, kind of in a, yeah, it's definitely, I recommend it. So one of my goals that I want to do is probably maybe the next 2 years, I would say I want to start like a course that helps people, like that helps professionals, like for example somebody who's a lawyer, or somebody who's an accountant, or somebody who's a financial planner, and they're looking to work with more people. I want to be able to help them start their own podcast and show them how they can get on other people's shows. We
Uh,
have a system in place, like my assistant emailed you, like
right.
we have a system in place where we're doing 20 appearances a month. So
Yeah.
I've probably done about 150 so far. And then yeah, we're looking now to kind of put the process together, and probably the next year, or so sorry, the next couple of years, to sell it to other advisors and professionals.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, clearly it's work. I think that's the future, right? There's so much power in podcasting and it's
Mhm.
so personalized and it's much deeper, right?
Mhm.
Like you hear like a radio ad or commercial and it's like, okay, like there wasn't a lot of value being added in that like
Mhm.
30 seconds or even that
Yeah,
TV.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Even a Super Bowl commercial, you're not really gaining any, you're not growing,
Yeah.
right? But when you get deeper, like you really get to understand the person. And, so many people who's been on my podcast said like they were able to get clients from it, right?
Mhm.
Because people can really get a feel of who you are, your style. Like, do I like his communication style? Do I like his approach? Like, it's a much more personalized and a much more depth associated with it.
Yeah, that's so right, man. Podcasting gives the clients the ability to like test drive you first, especially in a financial setting where it's
Mm.
like it's all about the person, right? You're not shopping for the company, you're not shopping for the person. You want to choose the right person. And a podcast is a great way to test drive, to demo the person, to test drive the person before you actually meet with them or do business with them. It's like, it's
Yeah.
way easier for me to tell somebody like in a couple of minutes, oh, hey, I have this podcast. It's on YouTube. It's on it's on Apple Podcasts. I'll just text you the links, or I'll just email you the links. Right.
Yeah.
And then for them to go and digest the information if they want to. And if they're ready to do business with me and they want to talk more, then they can come to me at any time. All the links are in every show notes. They're always, all the Calendly links I have, the calendar booking links are all there. LinkedIn, everything's there. The marketing is there. So they have the ability to reach out to me once they're ready. And I'm thankful. It works. It really works. You know, um, People tend to um appreciate you more, right, when you have content, and when you're
Yeah.
delivering. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. If you're listening to the show and you're thinking about getting your own podcast, it's worth it. It's worth it for sure. It's hard work, but it's worth it.
Yeah, and it builds that trust, right?
Mhm.
Like people who don't have a web presence, people that when you Google, you don't see much about them. It
Mhm.
really begs the question, like, did they start this yesterday? Like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, but I think the more you have out there, it's that trust, that brand, like that, okay, like he knows what he's doing. Obviously,
Mhm.
he's comfortable, he's a subject matter expert, right?
Yeah.
So it makes that trust process is huge. It bypasses a
Absolutely,
lot
man.
of
Yeah. Yep.
time being wasted. Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, really appreciate all your advice. This has been helpful. Just for me, I'm currently working with a Northwestern Mutual guy, and I have a
Nice.
financial advisor, and have a CPA, and then it's just cool because there's so many different philosophies, and you always learn something new. Where you like
Mm-hmm.
you think you know a lot, and then the more conversations you have, you're like, wow, I've never thought of that, or So I think it's just cool to for me, one of the takeaways is just like really just have that growth mindset, right? Like don't be so narrow-minded where like, oh, I know everything. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and just the power of podcasting. I'm always present to it. It's always something that, of course, it's like, it's not like I'm sure people would rather be watching TV, but instead, like you're really building that long-term like business. Like it's not like tomorrow. It's like you'll
Mm-hmm.
see the fruits of your labor years and years out.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You're right. It's about the future. It's about, planting the seeds. It's long term for sure. Yeah. And if listeners reach out, I can send them a free copy of a book called Becoming Your Own Banker. So the book is pretty much talking about, how you could leverage your own financial situation. I could send the
Ooh.
listeners a free copy of the book if they go
Okay.
to finassetprotection.com. It's finassetprotection.com.
Yeah, so I have your website. I'll link it. I'll link to your podcast and um a lot like your LinkedIn profile and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, man, I really appreciate you and appreciate you just being of service. Like clearly, like you're customized. Like you clearly don't have a one size fits all approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think at the end of the day, like you're really adaptable
Yeah.
and you understand that each in the individual person you have to meet them where they're at, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure.
I think yeah, I can really tell that you know what you're doing, and
Thank you.
yeah, I'm sure you're doing pretty well for yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Cool.